now. Okay, so good morning and welcome everyone. Welcome to our next installment in our ongoing work with some community outreach and information around ocean or marine energy. Today, we're going to be focusing specifically on some of the technologies and the environmental impacts of ocean and marine energy technologies. And we're fortunate to be joined by Andrea Coping, who is the Senior Advisor in the Coastal Sciences Division at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories, and Haley Farr, also with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. Before I turn it over to Andrea to get started, I would like if we can go around and maybe have everyone introduce themselves just very briefly so that Andrea and Haley have an idea of who it is that we are having this conversation with today. And I'm going to start with Parker because he is first on my grid of people.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. Andrea and Haley, it's great to meet you. I'm Parker Kushima, Outreach and Community Engagement Specialist with the Hawaii State Energy Office and coordinator of the Clean Energy Wayfinders program, some of which we have here today, and some other folks from the State Energy Office too. So really appreciate your folks' time and looking forward to all the information you have to share. I will pass it off to Joanne, who is next on my screen.
I think she said she was in another meeting in the chat box that she popped back in when that one was over.
She's here, but I think her mic is not working. Brian, do you want to kick it off and then I'll go over and see if I can get that fixed.
Well, yeah. Andrea, Haley, thank you for coming. I'm Brian DeSanti at the Hawaii State Energy Office, and I am the renewable energy specialist who focuses on any of the technologies that touch the water. So be looking forward to hearing what you guys are talking about today.
Great. Can we go to Kara?
Hi, I'm Kara St. Marie with the Hawaii State Energy Office, and I'm with the Hawaii Green Business Program.
And Peyton, I just saw you pop on, so go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Amy. Great to see you again. Hi, Andrea. Yeah, I'm looking forward to today's meeting. I am on Kauai, Kauai's Clean Energy Wayfinder with the State Energy Office. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
And we'll stick with the Wayfinders theme. Cyrene, would you like to go next? Okay, if not Cyrene, then Nikki.
Am I next?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Cyrene.
Thank you so much, Amy, and Ikalamai for not having my camera on today. I'm Cyrene Farrar with the Hawaii State Energy Office, Big Island Wayfinder, both Kona and Pahoa side, and I used to write on sustainability for the LA Times and served doing recycling across the island for about a year. So that's my background. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cyrene. Nikki, would you like to go next?
Hey, I'm Nikki Shitani. I work under Parker as one of the clean energy wayfinders on Oahu. Looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks, Nikki. Malia?
Aloha, everyone. I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear me too well. There's construction right outside my house. But my name is Malia McDonald. I'm the second Oahu Clean Energy Wayfinder working on the west side of the island of Nikki. I don't think comment is on right now, so I think that's it for the wayfinders also.
Thanks, you, Malia. Let's see, who haven't we heard from? Luke?
Hi, everyone. Luke Miller, Energy Economics Specialist at Hawaii State Energy Office. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke. And James?
Hi, everybody. James Francucci, also with the State Energy Office. It's a pleasure to meet you, Andrea and Haley. I am an AmeriCorps Vista. I serve as the Energy Climate Communication Specialist, and that basically just means that I help out with web development and governance. Pleasure to be here.
Great. And the last I have on my screen is Nicole. Nicole, you're muted. No.
Now, do you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's all right.
Wrong settings. Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Nicole Chernohorsky. I'm the Hawaii State Energy's Office's Transportation Energy Specialist. So the work that I do not directly related to this, but I am interested in all kinds of alternative sources of energy that could be used in transportation. And previously, I used to work as a marine biologist, so I'm kind of enthusiastic about everything related to the ocean environment. So I'm happy to be able to be here and listen in. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. And we've had Kamet join us now as well. Kamet, could you just give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yes, aloha. My name is Kamet Enos Nakane Lua. I am the Clean Energy Wayfinder for Maui Island. I've also been working in a supportive role with the Maui County Office of Innovation and Sustainability. Yeah, loving my time here. I'm about 6 months into the program. I've been given the rundown on everything energy in Hawaii, and it's a great life. Mahalo.
Great. Thank you, Kamet. Well, that's everyone we have right now. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Andrea and Haley. And you can go ahead and share screen and we'll get started on the presentation.
Thank you so much, Amy. Let me pull this up. I get rid of that piece. Okay, so thank you so much. And thanks everybody for introducing yourself. And thank you for having me and Haley here today. My name is Andrea Copping, and I have my colleague Haley Farr is here. We'll be sharing this presentation. We are both with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in the Seattle and actually Haley's down San Diego, but the West Coast area of the mainland. And we have been working in marine energy for some period of time. So we are very interested in being able to share what we know, and also as seeing some of these places, especially islands like Hawaii, really moving aggressively towards renewable energy. They seem like such perfect places for marine energy to be involved. I will tell you that, as Amy said, this is being recorded. We will also share the slide deck afterwards because it's kind of a dense slide deck, and you may not hear all of it or take all of it in, but you'll be able to see it afterwards. Haley will be monitoring the chat. I can't see it because I have a single screen, but if you want to put any comments in there or any questions. So what we're going to talk about today is in sort of—
Hey, Andrea, really quick,
Yes.
are you sharing the screen?
I am. Is it not sharing? Okay,
We're
let's
not
go
seeing
back.
it now.
Let's go back. It shared for a minute. Okay, let's try again. Thank you. I'm glad you told me that.
Yeah.
Oh, is it sharing
There
now?
it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Okay,
just go
good, good, good.
presenter.
Okay. Oh, that's weird.
There you go.
There you
All
go.
right.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, now you all appeared on the edge too. Thanks. So we're going to be presenting this in sort of 4 different segments, and we're going to pause at the end of each segment to see if there's questions about that, as well as having some time for questions and answers at the end. We'd really like to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, please go ahead. But we'll start by introducing marine energy. What is it? What does it consist of? How do we go about gathering it? We'll talk a lot about environmental effects, because I think as you talk with your communities, these are the kinds of things people worry about: social and economic effects, but also potential environmental effects. And in particular, we'll deep dive into the one technology we think is best suited for Hawaii. It's not the only one, but it is probably best suited. And then Haley will follow up talking about some of the data, information systems, and resources that are available to you. So here we go. These pictures you see right here are representing certain types of marine energy. The upper left is actually a tidal turbine out of France, Sabella, and that's a very typical, that one's maybe not typical with 6 blades, but many blades. The one on the right, upper and left lower, are both wave energy converters, those that are taking wave energy. You see they look pretty different and there's many different places. And the final one in the lower left is actually an ocean thermal energy conversion setup. This one happens to be in Japan. Okay, so talking about marine energy overall, what is it? Well, it's a new use of the oceans, and we talk about marine energy. We do not include offshore wind. I need to say that at this point, and that's a weird thing in US law. That's not true in other countries. But for us, marine energy is just the energy that's harvested from the movement of ocean water, so waves, tides, big ocean currents, but also other attributes like gradients of temperature or salinity. It's also been known by lots of different names in this country: marine renewable energy, MRE, marine and hydrokinetic energy, et cetera, et cetera. We'll just kind of stick with marine energy for now, but we also, it's called ocean energy in many other countries, so we're still trying to get the terminology down right. And again, each of these kinds of energy needs to be harvested with a different kind of machine. And here you have some more pictures of some of those machines. We're not going to go into them in great detail, but we do have, among other things online that Haley will talk about later, a really great photo gallery where you can both use the photos but get a sense of what these are. But again, upper left is a different kind of wave device. That thing would be upright and bouncing on the water surface when it's operating. The OTEC one that's actually out at Nelha in off Kona. Over in the upper right is a tidal turbine, orbital. Those are 2 big tidal turbines that are on a wing of the floating device, and those are lowered into the water. Lower left is a breakwater in Spain that has wave energy converters built into it. So as the waves come up, they compress air and turn turbines and then go back down. In the center is actually the mouth of a river in the Netherlands, where they have been generating some power between the salinity gradients of the river and the ocean. And then over in the lower right is another kind of turbine. It's actually in a river in Alaska. So it works very much like a tidal turbine, except the river's only going one direction. But again, this is not like a dam, not like conventional hydropower, but rather. So those are just some of the sort of variety of machines we're being using. So why would we bother to develop marine energy? If the world wanted to go to renewable energy today, it is estimated that the solar and wind capabilities, or at least the resources, could make up about 80% of what's needed. But what about that other 20%? And this is really where marine energy comes in. All of you know, you live by the ocean, you know how much energy is out there. You just have to stand at the water edge and watch the waves. And there are unique locations and uses for which marine energy is far better than solar or wind. In fact, probably the only energy source that makes sense. Think about going to high latitudes like the Arctic, where solar is sort of useless a good part of the year. Or if we generate and use power at sea, things like powering ocean observation systems, buoys, recharging autonomous underwater vehicles, and so on. These all run on batteries. And then you send out a $50,000 a day ship to change the batteries. What if we could generate the power in situ? Offshore aquaculture, as aquaculture is being pushed further out to sea, biofuels, etc. And also, probably most importantly here, remote coastal areas and islands, where with some energy storage and microgrids to really sort of smooth out any intermittency, this marine energy could be a really important source for islands, large and small. Okay, so thinking a little bit about Hawaii itself, the islands, the drivers for going to marine energy or any renewable are clear: climate change mitigation, energy independence, security, etc. I know you have some land-based wind on the islands. I know there is also limited appetite for more. Some of it's fine, but you're not going to cover the islands in turbines. There is commercial scale, of course, solar photovoltaics, both commercial scale and rooftop, and there's certainly room for more expansion there on all the islands. But things like offshore wind, which is becoming much more popular in many countries because there's a lot more wind offshore than onshore. There's really a lot of no-go areas around Hawaii. You know, the Humpback Islands National Marine Sanctuary really takes a lot of areas out of consideration. There's a lot of DOD areas, as you're all very aware. Funny, I couldn't find a map of DOD areas online. Funny thing, but also the very deep depths right off the islands would make it quite challenging to put offshore wind, say 10 to 30 kilometers offshore, which is very typical. So there's really some limitations there. So marine energy becomes a lot more attractive around the islands. There's a lot of good wave energy, as you all know. There's also very deep water close to shore, which allows for ocean thermal energy conversion, or OTEC, where you need to go down to the deep cold water. You might find some tidal or current energy between some of the islands, but it's pretty limited. And an aspect of OTEC, not exactly OTEC, seawater air conditioning, using cold, deep water, not quite as deep as what you need for energy generation, but using this in place of electricity for seawater air conditioning, because I don't need to tell any of you how much of electricity in the islands goes to air conditioning. It's really a large amount and very expensive. So I want to dive into wave energy a little bit. We're not going to focus on wave energy too much here today because it's been pretty well studied a lot of other places. But if you watch the waves from the shoreline, you know they differ in direction they come at you, the wave height, the wavelength, how strong those waves are. And we use wave energy converters, we call them WECs, that are designed to take advantage of many of these different attributes. There's a lot of them that sit on the surface and bob up and down. There's some subsurface, there's some even sitting on the seabed. And the sort of tricky technical part of wave energy converters, besides making sure they can last and are robust enough to deal with the ocean and the corrosive waters, etc., you need advanced controls to help anticipate those incoming waves so you can efficiently harvest the energy. Otherwise, you're really not getting as much as you might. There's been no technology convergence of wave energy converters, so many different designs to take advantage of these different attributes of waves. Plus, it's a very new technology, really in the last 20 years. Things like those turbines I showed you before. We've had turbines for gases and air and water and for 100, 150 years. We know those technologies. We don't know these technologies as well. So there's lots of inventors coming up with lots of different versions. There is one operational test site, a very key part of developing new energy or new technologies, period, is to be able to test them in realistic or semi-realistic conditions. There's only one wave energy test site in the US, and it is on the North Shore of Oahu, in Kineoe Bay, right off the Marine Corps Base, Hawaii, known as WETS, Wave Energy Test Site. It belongs to the Navy. The Department of Energy is invested there as well. And here you see one particular device, WEC, that is being tested out there, known as Sea Power. And what's happening here is those floating pieces are kind of moving back and forth and generating power. There's so many different ways of doing it, but at some point you're moving things and you're turning a generator. The gist of it. There is development of a full-scale wave to energy test site being put together off Oregon, because the waves at WETS are not huge by open ocean standards. So this is considered sort of an intermediate scale test site, but PacWave off Oregon is not yet ready. And a lot of these devices, smallish versions, are testing here at WETS. Okay, so how much wave energy is there in the US? This particular shot off the Marine Energy Atlas put together by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory gives you a sense of it. Now, weirdly enough, the smaller amounts are the darker colors. So those brighter, lighter colors is more wave energy. And what you see is the west coast of the US has got pretty good, strong wave energy, and Alaska's got a lot. What you see around the Hawaiian Islands is less. It's sort of an intermediate amount in this. And this is what we're looking at here is energy density per meter, per sort of capture meter, just one of many different ways you could look at this. If we zoom in on Hawaii a little bit more, Again, this is looking at average annual wave energy production, which is a weird number, but it's just telling you it's sort of an intermediate availability. And you all know waves tend to be lower in the summer. They are most consistent on the north shore of the islands, and you know that's where the biggest waves are for the surfing competitions and so on. At one point, there were plans to install a wave energy farm on the north shore of Maui. It didn't go forward, but that was working with the local utility. We think in terms of wave energy around Hawaii, probably the best use is at fairly small scale for communities, certain communities. Probably it's not Honolulu, it's not Kahului, it's probably the more isolated communities. And perhaps for offshore uses, if there were more offshore aquaculture developed, ocean observations, etc. So that's kind of where we think wave energy is at this point. The other technology we want to talk about, and certainly Haley's my obsession at the moment, is OTEC, or Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion. This is a pretty simple technology, but it's only viable in the tropics. And the reason is you generate power from the warm water on the surface, the temperature differential between that and cold, deep ocean water. You need about a 20 degrees centigrade differential to generate. Bottom ocean water, it runs between everywhere in the world between 2 and 4 degrees centigrade. So you need somewhere that's pretty consistently sort of 24 degrees centigrade at the surface. 78, 82, somewhere around there Fahrenheit. So we've had no large-scale OTEC systems ever developed, but there are a number of that are under development, both onshore systems bringing the water ashore and having all the energy paraphernalia onshore, and also the idea of offshore floating systems, which would then take a power cable with energy to shore. There's a potential for a lot of other important services with OTEC, which is where we think the real viability is, including seawater air conditioning that I mentioned before. Works just like OTEC, but you don't need quite as deep water. You just need it cool enough that you can actually cool chilling units for air conditioning. And that could be residential, hotels. It can also be industrial cooling for various companies. Okay, so to get into OTEC in the United States a little bit, there's only a few areas that are really suitable. Those are circled there. They're the Caribbean islands, Hawaii, of course, and some of the Pacific holdings like Guam. And OTEC has not been much of anything for the last decade in the US, but we do have some refocused interest lately. It dropped out of legislation, but was added back in 2020. So there has been some small amount of research money put towards it in the US recently. We have a lot of other countries with an awful lot of interest. And as I like to say to the Department of Energy, if the US doesn't do this, Asia or Europe will. And this will become a bigger thing around the world. So we have been exploring OTEC in the US. Haley and I and our project team have been talking to the OTEC experts around the world. This is a technology that started in the 1970s, and a bunch of the people who were working on it then are still around. So we talked to a lot of them as well as the newer generation. We looked at barriers to development, environmental effects, social perceptions, etc. And we put together 4 use cases. These are not real case studies, but what would this look like in Puerto Rico, in St. Croix, in Hawaii, of course, and in Guam? And we've gone as far as doing the resource assessment. How much really available energy is there around Puerto Rico? Haven't done the same with these other ones yet. We've also got some projects looking at the potential for aquaculture and marine energy in Hawaii, and looked really very much at these additional capabilities. You could provide power. One of the really interesting things about OTEC, it is 24/7 power and could help with things like disaster recovery. If the grid goes down or a portion of the grid goes down, there is the ability to restart the grid. There are also OTEC systems that can produce fresh water for those areas, for instance, St. Croix, which is a dry island and very much in need of fresh water. And we're currently working on another project, it's a theoretical, we're not actually building it, of Nelha in Hawaii, working with them on all these multiple uses. How many of them can we do together? Is this all sort of a pipe dream? Can you really create power and fresh water and air conditioning, etc.? Okay, finally, looking at OTEC in Hawaii, what are the attributes? The water depth drops off to 1,000 meters pretty close to shore, so that's the kind of depth you'd want pipes to go to, so you could do that, not too unreasonably. You would bring the offshore ones in to shore, and I'll talk about that whole sort of challenge through the reefs and the intertidal, or have this on an offshore platform. Typically, they try to make sure there's flexible attachment, so if there is a storm, a typhoon, or a hurricane, you can handle it. There is baseload power available from OTEC, which is and has far fewer maintenance interruptions built into it because the technologies are simple, much less maintenance than solar photovoltaics or wind, and it can be reconnected quickly. It is probably likely if this were developed in Hawaii, you would need to transport and bring in these long sections of pipe from the mainland or from Asia. But there is likely the local rigging capabilities in Hawaii, both to deploy, to install, and certainly to maintain this. These figures over on the right, because we haven't actually done the resource assessment yet, but we see, especially in the lower one, we see that the temperature stays plenty warm enough year round. That's the real issue. We have places like Florida where people have investigated OTEC and it works great for about 8 months of the year, but then at times there just isn't enough temperature differential. So it seems to be Hawaii is a pretty sweet spot for that. Okay, so I'm going to pause here talking about our sort of introduction to marine energy, just very fast through there, and see if there are any questions. I see that there is something in the chat. Spontaneously boosting OTEC. I love hearing that. Thank you. So any other questions we can answer now, or we will certainly have time at the end as well.
I can pop in one.
Yeah.
Oh, go for it, Brian.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry, so Parker, sorry. Said some of the barriers to I guess the barriers to getting it built. I guess
money.
Now social perceptions on there. Money, yeah, because I know there's the small one out here. It's hard for scalability. Do you see any of that changing as you're looking more and more into the technology?
I think there's a very small but very passionate, crazed, committed group of OTEC people around the world. And the general consensus is it's money and it's political will. But if there was ever a time we have a chance of getting it, it's probably now. It's the coming together of the real acceptance of climate change and the need to mitigate everywhere. It is the possibility of some of these additional kinds of products and services like seawater air conditioning that may help to bring, at least perceptionally, those costs down to something more reasonable, so sort of spreading it across more uses. So we think that there's really a possibility. We are very excited with the Biden administration's, infrastructure bill and things like that. We're talking about half a bridge here is what we're talking about in terms of funds. So we do think that there's real potential now. And organizations like the Small Island Developing States, the SIDSTOC, are very, very interested. And these are all the small, unaffiliated, individual state islands. And as they've said to me, this isn't a nice to have for them. This is survival. The combination of islands relying on diesel and fluctuating costs, never mind the potential environmental and human health effects, there is really a push with the development banks and others. So we think that there's real possibility now. So I think so. You mentioned social perceptions, and this is something we're very interested in, and there's very little research on. So this is where we're really hoping when you guys go out and talk to communities, you'll get more feedback along those lines.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys had anything, because the few people I've spoken to about it, it's like there's almost nothing known about it from that side from people I've talked to. So thank you.
When we finished our first project, we decided there was little known, and we actually put together an educational set of slides to be used. And you're going to see some of those today, but we do have a deck sort of aimed at different audiences to sort of take you from soup to nuts through OTEC, because it's not well known at all. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Any others?
Just call calling out Serene's in the chat here, which I think mine's kind of relates to, but Serene asked any
Oh,
cost
just
analysis projection. Oh, sorry, Serene, do you want to expand upon that in the chat?
oh yeah, exactly what Parker said. And I know cost is probably experimental right now, where it's a larger cost per kilowatt or megawatt. But what's the projection in the future? Could it get down to be competitive with you?
Yeah. So marine energy writ large is not cost competitive with solar or wind, either on land or at sea at the moment. Which is why we've started to really focus, instead of thinking, especially on the mainland, of sort of national grid level, thinking about these more targeted sorts of areas like offshore, at sea and remote communities, because there's no question you are paying a lot more for electricity, as are, say, villages in Alaska, things like that. So we think this makes a lot of sense for many of these technologies. And we do have some cost analysis for things like wave and so on, but it depends so much where you are. OTEC, there is relatively little cost information. An international report has just come out in the last couple of weeks, and we haven't really had much chance to delve into it to really look at some of these costs. With OTEC, the real problem is the capital costs. It's big, but because it is a 24/7 operation, once you get past that capital cost, the levelized cost of energy should be very competitive with any of these other renewable sources. And we look at things like land-based wind and the trend they've gone through in bringing down costs, and we're already starting to see these levelized cost of energy estimates for tidal and wave and so on coming down. So a lot of tidal energy being under development in Europe and the UK. And so we're starting to get some good information there. It's not 100% directly applicable to a place like Hawaii, but we do see, so we saw it with solar, we saw it with wind, high costs, and then they come down really dramatically as you start to deploy them. So we think that the cost of things like OTEC, once you've sort of amortized that enormous capital cost, can be really cost competitive. Probably much cheaper than diesel, especially where it's heading. So yeah. It's one of the real problems when you're new at something, you're some of the early ones. Okay,
Thanks,
so
Andrea. And then,
yes,
sorry.
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Aiming against diesel. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, that's a great.
Thank
you so much.
One last question from
Yes.
me about the kind of desalinization applications of OTEC. Is it just a side benefit, or does it have significant output to the point where it's like a real intangible benefit alongside the, say, electricity production or swap
Great question.
applications of
Great question. There are different types of OTEC processes, and the so-called open OTEC cycle, I wasn't going to go into those a lot, though I do have a slide on it, allows you to desalinate because you're using the seawater, you're distilling it basically as the actual energy process. You can't get it hugely big compared to, it's not going to be like an industrial desalination plant. But for islands, it's not going to cover Oahu or Big Island, but for isolated communities, it can make a real difference. We have some really nice, both anecdotal and data from a couple of dry islands in the Arabian Sea off India. They put in desalination plants, small OTEC plants, essentially, where they were after the desalinated water, not the power. And after a couple of years, they saw really strong improvements in public health from having clean water, electricity, and refrigeration. So it can make a difference. It is small. They figure that the largest plant you can do with the open cycle reasonably is about 5 megawatts. And you can go a lot bigger with the closed cycle. It's just the scaling of things, but it can make a difference in a small island. Yes. So not too many in place just yet, but hopefully we will get there. Okay, so should we talk about environmental effects? Okay, so I'm going to sort of step back a little. Come on. Oh, there we go. No, and we're going the wrong direction here. What's happening? There we go. So I just want to step back a little bit, and Haley and I are both representing an international organization called Ocean Energy Systems Environmental. Ocean Energy Systems is 25 countries that have come together to look at ocean energy development, really marine energy, internationally under the International Energy Agency. And they have tasked us, the US, with leading this OES environmental, looking at environmental effects of marine energy as they affect permitting. How do we move forward responsibly, getting these devices in the water? We have been running now for about 14 years. We have 16 of those 25 countries involved in this particular task. You can see the flags down there. And what we do is we bring together and help develop the agenda for research and monitoring for environmental effects around the world. And we publish a great deal of this. We do the analysis. We do hold a lot of expert forums and webinars and all that good stuff. So a lot of what you're hearing is not just sort of coming out of our laboratory, but really is the best information available internationally. So the way we look at environmental effects is through a lens we call stressors and receptors, where stressors are those part of a device or a system that could cause harm, injury, or death or stress. And the receptors are those marine animals, the habitats, the ecosystem processes. And after working at this for some time, we've brought that down to these 7 stressors you see here in the little icons. And the picture on the left is just trying to sort of show where these things might take place. And I'm going to talk about each one of these 7 in not too much detail, but there's a detailed slide on each you can certainly look at later. Some are more relevant to Hawaii than others. So if we get started on those, I also want to note that most of the work that's been done and most of the countries involved until recently have been temperate countries, also Northern Hemisphere. And we're recognizing that tropical ecosystems are rather different. They're from an ecosystem basis, they're much more a biodiversity basis, they're much more involved and complex than our temperate systems. So we're really trying to move what we know and make it more applicable to tropical systems. But that is really a work in progress right now. So if we look at these different stressors, we'll start with underwater noise. These are machines, so they're generating power, there's moving parts, they're making noise. And what we know is already a somewhat noisy ocean. We know that underwater noise can actually cause physical injury to animals, particularly marine mammals and certain fish. However, I want to stress, we do not pile drive for marine energy the way it's done with, say, bottom-based wind. So it's not enormous, loud percussive sounds during installation, but rather during operation. There is, turning things and noise. And the worry is more changes in behavior. Fortunately, we have an international specification of how to measure noise. These are pretty high energy areas, and it's not always clear what you're measuring when you're working with various kinds of hydrophones and other devices. But we have a standardization of how to measure this. We also have action thresholds from NOAA for marine mammals and guidance from BOEM for fishes. So we have a pretty good sense of what the noise levels need to be below. And to date, every WEC or turbine we have measured has in fact fallen well below those action levels for concern of behavioral or other kinds of damage. What going forward, what we really need to be able to say about this is we need to get a sound graph of every new type of device that goes in the water. And that's what we are recommending to the device developers. Get that well documented when you go to get a permit to deploy. So we feel pretty good about this, especially for small numbers of machines. If we think of electromagnetic fields, EMFs, we know that as soon as you put electricity running through water, you get a magnetic signal. And in seawater, you can have also an induced electrical field. It's a little different than in freshwater or soil or air, where you also get an electric signal. It works differently in seawater. The concern here is certainly, and only certain marine animals have the sensory capability to detect EMFs. There's some of the sharks, rays, skates, not all of them, but some of them, some of the crustaceans, the decapods like shrimp and lobster. And the concern is this will really change their behavior. Will they go and just hang out on a cable instead of hunting? What we know from both field and laboratory tests is the amount of power being carried in these cables by marine energy devices and in the foreseeable future is well below where we have concerns about really doing any harm. We did a bunch of these experiments in our marine laboratory out on the West Coast, and it was very interesting. We'd have a control and an energized cable, and a number of these things like fish and crab and lobster would notice. They definitely knew the signal was there. They'd take notice and then they go about their business. And within a day or so, they just didn't even bother. So we feel pretty certain with the small amounts of power being carried by these devices, we aren't terribly concerned. We are going to change some habitats. You put down an anchor, you put a foundation on the bottom, you lay a cable, whoops. You will in fact make some changes in the habitats in the bottom. And you'll have buoys and mooring lines and cables draped in the water column, so you will change things. But this is no different than anything else we place at sea, any other development at sea. So we feel we have a strong sense of what this may be. In some cases, you actually create some hard bottom habitat where there isn't any, and you see increases in organisms. You will get fish reefing around them, but it's hard to see much in the way of harm that way. Changes in oceanographic systems. We are putting devices in the water, and we're going to change some circulation, some wave height, etc. But the number of these devices in the water, whether they're WECs or turbines, are so low right now, we cannot measure that change against the natural variability in the system. So what we know is from numerical models, computer models, and what you have to do is put hundreds and hundreds of WECs in the water to make a difference in things like longshore currents, sediment transport, and so on, probably far more than anyone will ever let you deploy. But we do need to keep an eye on this as we go to larger developments. But right now, we feel this isn't much of a concern. Mooring line encounters. This is something that has been raised. It's more of a theoretical concern, particularly if you had a whole lot of wave energy converters or floating wind devices with a lot of mooring lines. Would the large marine mammals, for example, the humpbacks, be confused, get among these lines and entrap or entangle themselves? We do not see evidence, have never seen any evidence of this, but we don't have many out there. And there's been a good deal of modeling done that shows scale-wise, this probably isn't a big concern. Some people are concerned you may get marine debris, nets tied up on these lines and cause additional entanglement. Again, it's this has to happen and that has to happen and that has to happen. And so we don't see this as much of a concern at this point. Displacement, again, a concern when we might have a whole lot of devices in the water. This little drawing here is showing some gray whales migrating north down at the bottom here on their original route up the west coast of the US. And those little round yellow things are wave energy converters. What happens when they suddenly encounter a whole lot of these on their migratory pathway? Will they be excluded and turn around? Will they avoid them by going inshore or offshore, the pink arrows? Or will they actually be attracted to them? And the reason we care is if they avoid them and have to swim, say, further out to sea, will this bioenergetically make it difficult to get to their, say, Arctic feeding grounds? So this is a concern that we need to keep an eye on, but until there's a lot of these in the water, it really isn't something we can measure. So again, not a present concern, but one to consider in future. And I've saved the one that is the toughest for last, and happily it's quite not really applicable for Hawaii, and that is collision risk. The concern with turbines turning blades is that animals could run into them and be harmed, injured, a fatal injury, or actually killed. And this is the one that is holding up tidal energy development around the world, as well as some of the turbines in rivers. Because you're trying to prove something won't happen, and that's pretty hard to do. We're getting better and better information. We've used a lot of underwater video, acoustic cameras, etc., but it still remains an open question. However, I do not really see turbines being a big thing for Hawaii. It really is not what you're about. So overall, for small numbers of devices, and even as we start to increase, we're not seeing what we think are big issues, which is nice because we've been working at this for some time. Okay, so I want to pause there and just see if there are questions about environmental effects, because I went over that all pretty quick. You'll have all the slides if you want to look at them more. Yes, please. Parker, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Question about changes in oceanographic systems.
Yes.
Are there any studies or thoughts around this possibly serving some potential benefit in the case where coastal communities have, say, stuff like sea level rise or increased erosion due to climate change? Is there any possibility that these changes could, help to mitigate some of those impacts?
Boy, is that a great question, Parker. We have some studies from various parts of the world, notably southern Spain, where they've used WEX offshore to sort of cut down on the wave energy that is causing erosion. It's a bit of a two-edged sword because where most big erosion events occur is extreme events, storms. And in most cases, you'd lock your WEC down and not have it operating during those to save the gear. But there are certain geometries of systems or bays where it seems like this would actually help. And there's a whole series of papers out of one bay in Spain where they clearly are showing they're cutting down the erosion. So I think it depends, but there is some possibilities for sure. It's certainly worth an investigation versus a hardening shoreline. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question because it's been brought up a lot. Yes, Irene.
MREs attract food sources for these marine mammals and seabirds that can increase their number.
Sorry, I missed the very first part of that. Something as a food source.
But the MREs attract food sources for the marine animals and seabirds that might increase their numbers and population.
Absolutely. These will act as fish attractant devices. There's absolutely no question. A reef effect. We all know that if you put something in the ocean, something goes and sits beside it, right? And I know that the state of Hawaii puts out the buoys to attract game fish. And so there's absolutely the possibility of that. Depends on which side you're sitting on. Is this additional food for those animals? It's been raised. What if every endangered fish came and sat there and got eaten by a predator, which is again one of those slightly silly what ifs, but there will definitely be attraction for fish. So sure. And I think again, this is the tropical ocean versus the temperate, where the tropical ocean tends to be less food rich. And so this becomes much more important in the food chain. And as we talk about OTAC, we can talk a little bit about, can we make some difference in that? Great questions. Yes, please go ahead. Oh, Cyrene, did you have another question? Okay.
Oh, Andrea, I was just curious about any work that's maybe been done with the displacement issue and then the interaction with shipping traffic as well, particularly in shipping dependent places like Hawaii. There's some ways it may or may not be more of an issue than, say, like the coast of California or the west coast of the US, where you have such huge amounts of like well-regulated shipping tracks. But about any work that's been done about that displacement, and then it's already a so-called wicked problem of whale strikes with ships, how those two things might interplay as well.
It's a great question, Amy. I don't know what to tell you. We did a project a few years ago, actually in the Atlantic, when they were starting to put in wind farms and starting to look at shipping and wind farms. And it's very unclear as they develop these technologies, be the offshore wind farms, wave energy farms, whether there will be no-go areas even among them. Because many of not so much the wave energy devices, but the floating wind platforms are a kilometer or two apart. In Europe, they generally make them no-go areas, partly because most insurance claims are from people hitting cables, and so they just try to keep them out of there, the fishers and the shipping. So it's yet to be determined, I think. But you're absolutely right. We already have a big displacement and collision risk, as in ship strike problem with large whales. I think it's like any other sort of conflict of users. This is going to have to be worked out. And marine energy and offshore wind is definitely sort of the new entries there. And marine spatial planning and so on has got to take this into account. And of course, in the islands, you've got that added thing of you have a lot of security shipping. You've got a lot of DoD movement. And that is some of the things that are going to have to be dealt with. But yeah, there hasn't been much in the way of studies, but it's really when I work with a lot of marine energy developers and they're having trouble getting through permitting and so on, they'll say, but look, we're having so much less effect than oil spills or shipping or this, but our federal and state laws don't really work that way. So yeah, I know. Great questions though. Serene, did you have
Another
another
question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Serene, if you have one, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I'm turning my.
You still got your hand up. Okay, that's fine. Okay, Brian, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I was gonna ask because you mentioned, as more of these facilities are coming online and they're just kind of de facto making them no-go zones. So that kind of makes them like de facto marine reserves.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any studies to see if there's any benefits to fish populations because of that?
Well, yeah, great point. They would be de facto marine reserves. There's an awful lot of research on, increased population sizes, size of individual, especially fish and so on in marine reserves. And we have to assume that that would translate over if those were in fact, made no-go areas. There hasn't been much research directly on that. The other thing to note is that many marine reserves, of course, cover big areas, but they don't target high energy areas. What we're talking about here is targeting the areas with lots of wave or tidal or whatever. And so we do know a little less about these parts of the ocean, but we have every reason to think that if they were no-go, they would act as reserves. Yeah. Nicole.
Yes, I had a question around the OTEC technology and whether, I guess, how much research has been done into the effects of sort of displacing the cold water and sort of mixing, I don't know, nutrients and plankton and stuff like that. Has that
Absolutely. So let's move on to the next section, and you're going to get that in agonizing detail. So thank you. It's a great segue. So let's move on to our deep dive into OTEC. So I mentioned that this is, of course, carried out with the temperature differential between warm surface water and cold deep water. Plants can be onshore or offshore, and they do generate continuously. There's these numbers don't mean much to anybody, including me, but you get the sense that if you think of those the red areas of the world there around sort of clustered around the equator, these are the very highest differentials in temperature, and then as you sort of get away from the equator, they drop off a little bit. But if you were to look at the amount of technically, which means can you actually go get it? We're not sure, but we can measure it. OTEC potential in the US, that 4,600 terawatt hours per year is way more than the US electricity demand is. And the same with that worldwide one. So the point here is just there is a huge energy resource there. Can we get it all? Probably not. Would we want to get it all? Certainly not. But it is a huge resource. Okay, so just to quickly go over again, onshore plants would bring pipes from the deep cold water up to the up on shore, and you'd also take warm water from not right at the surface, but just a meter or two down, bring it on shore, run it through this process, and send it back out. And that gets to Nicole's question, which we'll get to in a second. Onshore plants generally aren't thought to get very big, more like sort of 1 to 10 megawatts, but they'd be pretty easy to do. The bigger ones would have to be floating offshore. And there's been all these sort of dreams of what if we were trying to really do things like marine carbon dioxide removal? What about a whole slug of floating plants right along the equator, out of the typhoon zone? 100-megawatt plants at sea doing this. And in that case, if you were using it at sea or generating hydrogen, and somebody mentioned transportation. Generating hydrogen is one of the things that's been talked about a lot with these big offshore generators, where you don't want to bring a cable hundreds of kilometers to shore, but rather add an ammonia or a hydrogen plant onto that. So that is being experimented with, at least at this point. Okay, just a little bit of history here. OTEC dates back, it was first proposed in 1880. There was actually an operational plant in Cuba in 1930, and there's some great historical photos if anyone wants to see them. In the late 70s, early 80s, when we had an oil crisis, that's when OTEC kind of got to be interesting. And there was a mini OTEC plant developed at Nelha. We all know about the plant in Nelha at Kona. And in the early 80s, the US actually put one on a floating barge, or it was an old Navy ship, and operated that for a period of time. That's what we're seeing in the upper photo there. And it worked. We know it works. And there's been several other of these kinds of experiments since. Lots of little pilot demonstrations, small commercial ones. We just haven't sort of broken through to the big time. This is a pipe. This is actually a pair of pipes that are being deployed. I think this one's might be in French Polynesia, that's been deployed there for some time. So in terms of operational plants, there's really two, maybe three, depending on how you count them. There is a demonstration project in Okinawa on Kumajima Island in Japan. It started as a deep water, bringing up the deep water for aquaculture and other purposes, and they then added a small OTEC plant on top of it, put the pipes down deeper. They have a very active aquaculture program there. They also use the deep water for a whole line of cosmetics and drinks. And I'm still a little unclear about some of that, but it's a very large industry. So using this very clean water. Then, of course, there is the one at Nelha, which is being operated by Mackay engineers. It is being run mostly bringing up the cold water for some of the uses right on site there. Some of the aquaculture companies are using it for chilling, cooling. And they are working with using it really as a research facility, improving on heat exchangers and et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of it. It did operate for a period of time, generating to the grid, but it generally is not doing that right now. There's planned deployments. This is an old map, but courtesy of CRISO out of Korea. But there's lots of proposals and ideas of where you might be able to deploy these kinds of in the US waters, but all over. And actually, the most active one right now is not even on this map, but there's two dry islands off the west coast of Africa, Santau and Principe. And the small island developing state, SIDSTOCS, is working with several of the development banks, and they have the final design for that project right now, and they're just looking for sort of the final bits of money. But those would be two small floating plants right off those dry volcanic islands. So we're moving forward. There were several in the Caribbean that were getting underway right when COVID hit, and that took kind of a toll there. In addition to, the French actually have an operational plant, but it's only operated occasionally, and it's military in Réunion in the Indian Ocean. So there's little ones happening. Okay, so let's talk environmental effects. It's been studied. We have a pretty fair sense of it. And it doesn't seem to be worrying anybody too much, but obviously you will have to do some baseline assessment and monitoring wherever it's developed. And if you went to larger ones, there might be some different issues. And so this is getting to Nicole's question. This particular drawing we've done here, we're really trying to show what does the intake and discharge pipes look like. If you start in the middle with that dark blue pipe, that's taking in the deep water from very deep ocean. And it comes up and goes into the plant. In this case, we've made it a floating one, maybe off Nelha, maybe somewhere. And then after it comes out the plant, it comes back in that slightly lighter blue pipe because it won't be quite as cold anymore. And the density of the water, of course, is determined by the salinity and the temperature. And so that cold water coming back out is a little less dense because it's not quite as cold. So it's actually coming out not quite as dark blue. Similarly, the red pipes are taking warm water in from the right-hand side, discharging it from the left-hand side, but it won't be quite as warm anymore. It'll be a little cooler. So what we want to have happen here, we don't want to dump all that cold water right in the surface ocean because it is cold enough it will temperature shock the biota from the phytoplankton all the way through the fish and the whales in that water. There is also the potential to destabilize the water column itself, the stability, the density. So what we're trying to do is get that water to go back to where it belongs density-wise. So the cold water discharge pipe is designed so that some of it will dissipate, but most of it will sink back down to its proper color of blue, its proper density. This is the biggest environmental issue associated with OTEC, but there's been a lot of thought and a lot of modeling and a lot of engineering design going into how it would be mitigated. Our laboratory has just developed an open source model for this discharge. It'll be published in the next couple of months. They're just working on the paper now. Mackay actually has a model they've been using for some time, but it's a proprietary model. And as a national laboratory, we felt it was important to have an open source one. So here's what I just told you. You know, you bring this water up, you got to get it back to where it belongs. There's another really interesting thing about this cold, deep water. Of course, it's nutrient rich. And we know the surface waters in tropical oceans are nutrient poor, that lovely blue water. So it's been suggested that this nutrient water, if put in the upper ocean, would spur more growth. Or it could be used, so almost like an artificial upwelling, or it could be used in aquaculture purposes. And my multi-use project has been looking at this. And it's a really great idea, but it's got a problem. That deep water is also very high in carbon. And if we were to bring that water up and say use it in an aquaculture facility or the surface ocean, by the time the nutrients were used up, there'd still be a huge credit of carbon that we would be releasing into the atmosphere and the surface ocean. So that's not a very good idea. That was one of the ideas it's been floated for a long time. It's one of the things that our project is trying to look at. What makes sense, what doesn't. Okay, some other, I think, much less important issues, but need to be mentioned. This very deep pipe pumping from the surface, from the deep ocean, could in fact entrain marine life. We find from the operational plants in Kona and in Kiwajima in Japan, it's really rare. They have a process for seeing if these are coming up. They end up in a little moon pool. And it happens very, very rarely. And most of you probably know the deep ocean doesn't have very high density of biota anyway. But it's something that should be taken into consideration. And then also chemicals. This is an industrial plant. There will be most of the OTAC processes use ammonia in this closed process of heating and cooling. And ammonia, of course, is toxic to humans, to marine life, etc. if there were a leak. There will be petroleum products, there will be some lubricants and other chemicals on board. But and so you don't want that in the ocean or in the atmosphere. But as part of any permitting process, any industrial facility will have to identify and analyze and have a hazardous waste mitigation plan. So it's something that has to be dealt with, but it's not mysterious. It's not unique to this process. So some other potential effects. And this is where, if we were to go to a whole lot of plants out there, things like, could we start to change how the intertidal oceanography works? Could the migration pathways be disturbed? Could we entangle animals in lines? Do we worry that we're attracting so many fish and invertebrates, we're taking them away from elsewhere? It's also been postulated that we might introduce non-native species this way, though this is a theory that's been around a while, and we've never been able to prove it with any offshore device. People have looked. So we think that at the moment, we don't have a whole lot of OTEC anywhere. We think these are things that will have to be watched, but we don't see them as being, a problem at this point, and probably can be sorted out better as with ongoing research. So I just want to sort of end up talking a little bit about some of the additional things. I've talked about seawater air conditioning a good deal. This can be done. We have some lovely data out of French Polynesia, where out of Tahiti, they have been cooling a large hospital complex with seawater air conditioning for quite a few years. They're actually putting in a second pipe to use more in the area. And they have really great data from when they were running their whole chilling system with diesel generated electricity versus seawater air conditioning, and the savings is really, really big. And the decrease in spills and air emissions and so on has been very, very key. Desalinated water, we talked about a little bit, absolutely. And then the whole idea of aquaculture. Can we spur aquaculture? It's interesting because I've talked to the Japanese Kiwajima folks about this whole excess carbon issue, and I'm not getting very good answers. So I don't think they're dealing with it, quite honestly. I think they're using the nutrients from depth and not worrying about it. So, but this is something that I think we have to be very aware of, it not making, shall we say, the climate change crisis worse. Okay, siting and community involvement. This has got to be very tightly tied to community values and needs. And I think really trying to site these plants carefully so that you're not interfering with other uses, and making sure that you're mitigating any issues early. But we have very little research on this. What little we've heard from the islands that have had an interest in OTEC and got pretty far in planning, there has been mostly very positive response because of things like concerns over electrical rates, diesel supply, etc. Where the biggest concerns come in is worry about damage to reefs and nearshore habitats. But I need to tell you that is not a real concern, because in modern industrial things that are put in the ocean, we don't do that. We horizontally directionally drill. You start outside the reef, you come under the intertidal, and you come up on land. So although it is something that regulators and stakeholders have great concerns about, there is no reason to come through the reef. In fact, it's safer to put the pipes and cables and so on further under the seabed. So that's one that I think that people bring up, but I think it's something that can be mitigated. And finally, in dealing with siting community involvement, I think it's incredibly important to recognize that perhaps there will be some installation jobs, and the maintenance jobs should absolutely be done by locals. There is no reason that kind of training can't be provided. Very little of this is very difficult. And if you have people that are trained in any other kind of industrial mechanical plants, this should be nothing out of the ordinary. Okay, a little bit of quick something on regulatory. We have no pathway for permitting for OTEC in the US. They developed one in the 80s, and it was then withdrawn later on in one of the Paperwork Reduction Acts. And so NOAA, National Ocean Service, if they get a seawater air conditioning or an OTEC application, they just try to deal with it one by one. We do really need to have better resource assessments so we can assure both regulators and investors that there's power there. And this is where we really realized what a lack of awareness there is among the public, government officials, investment communities, etc. And we did develop an education program around that. And the final sort of, I think, piece here, if the whole barriers to development is, this has got to be public money that's going to initially do this. We think there is private money around the world. I've been assured by the people that know something about this, which isn't me, that if we really could get that first really good operational OTEC plant, something with a big sort of operational center you could bring people to, they really believe that the investment money is there. So. And that is all I have to say, and I've run way over what I should, but I'd like to see if there are questions there about OTEC. I could talk OTEC all day. So.
Question from me about the additional services again.
Yes.
Are those when those are implemented, I know they'd probably be increased infrastructure or capital costs,
Mhm.
do any of those take away from the efficiency of electricity production, or are they all just additional like downstream services?
What a great question. Sort of the driving question of this project, we're about halfway through right now. Not only do they, do they add cost, do they add revenue, but also which ones work together. As a quick example, if you were to really prioritize desalinating seawater, that does decrease efficiency of power a little bit. Some of the others we don't know about. One of the others we're examining, another out there idea, extracting critical minerals from seawater, not seabed mining, but actually critical minerals from seawater. We have folks in our lab that have developed absorbents that will preferentially scavenge things like lithium and strontium and some of these things that are being mined on land. And you're all very aware of new applications to go after manganese nodules and seabed mining and all that stuff. You can take this out of seawater, but it's very inefficient. However, if you are moving a huge amount of seawater already, can you in fact double these sorts of things up? So you're right, Parker, they will all increase infrastructure cost. What we believe is that the benefits, the downstream benefits and the additional users will really help to mitigate that and make OTEC itself more attractive. So, but stay tuned. The end of this year, we should have our report out to get a better sense of that. And including things like hydrogen and ammonia production, which people are talking about a great deal for all renewables. I mean, Australia wants to export a huge amount of hydrogen because of all their wind, and where are they going to send that power? So we're just at the cusp of this, but we think that there is some good balance. Okay, so now that I've hogged so much of this time, I'm going to turn this over to Haley to talk a little bit about data and information systems and some real resources for you. So Haley.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Yeah, and I'll probably try and keep this as short as possible so we can still have time for questions at the end. But essentially, we're going to talk about the portal and repository for information on marine renewable energy, which we call Primer. It's essentially sort of an umbrella system for a bunch of suite of knowledge hubs, we call them. You can call them websites, databases, repositories. Really, they just provide a different sort of data, information, or resource to the marine energy community. Primer, again, is sort of the one-stop shop. So you can search content throughout the other knowledge hubs on Primer, but we also have some like educational resources, some marine energy basics, if you want to find out a little bit more about the technology types. We do host webinars, and we have all of our webinars archived on Primer as well. We have an events calendar, so any of the workshops, conferences, webinars on marine energy around the world are all hosted on there, which is like another great resource for the community. Within the US, we have a lot of educational sort of STEM resources. So students interested in potentially getting involved in like prize competitions, there's a lot of information there for them as well. And then getting into more of the nitty gritty, we do have a lot of data tools and software for those maybe developers or industry folk who want to dive into the resources more so. And again, just Primer is a US Department of Energy resource, so it's primarily US, but we do have a lot of international content and support through OES and some other systems, and it's primarily led by PNNL, NREL, and Sandia. So we have sort of a multi-lab coordinated effort to really help get information out. Next slide, please. So again, the Primer kind of system is divided into these knowledge hubs. Each one has a different sort of identity, type of format and content. I'll go through each one really, really quickly in the next few slides, and then I'll focus on TETHIS, which is our kind of environmental effects knowledge hub, the one primarily focused on that. So again, each one, they are their own individual knowledge hub, their own identity, but you can search throughout the Primer knowledge hubs on the Primer website. So we're trying to make accessibility as easy as possible, but knowing that there is a lot of content within each individual website to dive into if you or the audiences that you work with are so interested. So just at a really high level, MHKDR is our data repository. So kind of raw data sets, QA/QC data sets. TETHIS and TETHIS Engineering host documents, so conference papers, journal articles, reports. Marine Energy Software hosts codes and software. Telesto is sort of a mixed bag of testing and measurement guidance, sort of resources along the project development cycle. The Marine Energy Projects database hosts project information around the world, so I can get into that in a little bit as well. And then the Marine Energy Atlas hosts kind of geospatial data, so it's a mapping platform that allows users to look at different resource layers. So again, I'll dive through those really quickly in a second, but we'll focus on TETHIS at the end. So next slide, please. Okay, so again, really quickly, MHKDR, we do have all those different terms for marine energy, but the Marine and Hydrokinetic Data Repository, we have over 300 data sets. All of these are managed and curated by a team at the National Renewable Energy Lab, so you can be sure that you're getting content that is hopefully valuable and can be reused in the future. Next slide, please. TETHIS Engineering, again, it's a documents library. It mainly focuses on the engineering and technical aspects of marine energy development versus TETHIS, which focuses on the environmental effects. So some of the topics we cover, for example, are performance, economics, manufacturing, really diving into the actual development cycle. One resource I did want to highlight on TETHIS Engineering that's really useful for communities is our TETHIS Engineering photo library. We have over, I believe, 700 marine energy photos from about 70 different marine energy developers from around the world. These are all free use, so you're free to use those in presentations or outreach materials in the future. We just ask that you attribute to the developer. So again, a great resource, lots of awesome technology types kind of encapsulated in that photo library. So a good educational resource as well. Next slide, please. So the Marine Energy Projects database, this is actually structured in a way that the community can input information. So it's divided into projects, test sites, devices, and organizations. And then there's additional information on technology types as well. But essentially, a user could input information on their organization, their project, their test deployment. It's aiming to be really just this high-level, up-to-date repository of project information around the world. Next slide, please. So the Marine Energy Atlas, again, is a GIS system. It's open access. It's an interactive mapping tool. You should be able to access a lot of the data sets from MHKDR in the mapping feature. And it's really mainly for resource characterization, but there are a lot of additional data layers that provide information on projects around the world, marine protected areas, etc. So it's a good kind of multifaceted tool. Next slide. Telesto, once again, is a lot kind of baked in there. There's wikis, there's databases, there's different sort of summaries on a lot of the terms that we're talking about when we talk about marine energy development. So we've divided it into the timeline, the development pathway, everything from planning, designing, to testing devices, and then decommissioning that project. There's some cross-cutting kind of topics and themes such as metrics and standards, terminologies that you can actually dive into additional information and resources. So it's really sort of a network of resources on Primer and then throughout the Primer knowledge hubs as well. Next slide, please. Marine Energy Software, no, sorry, there's a lot, is our knowledge hub for commercial and open source software, hopefully mostly relevant to marine energy, but there are a lot of softwares that are also relevant to ocean engineering in general, marine sciences. Next slide. Okay, so the one I wanted to focus on with TETHIS, and I know we're getting close to time, is TETHIS is our environmental effects knowledge hub. So it has information and resources primarily on marine energy, but also on offshore wind and land-based wind. So if I'm happy to answer questions on that in the future, if you're doing a future webinar, I can maybe pitch some of those resources as well. But essentially, it's another documents library. We have over 9,000 documents, journal articles, conference papers, reports, a lot of which can't be found anywhere else online anymore. Some of those organizations go under or links break. So a lot of TETHIS is archived material that is very important to maintain. Some of our additional features include an events calendar. We have a biweekly TETHIS Blast newsletter, a bunch of other resources. If you want to just go to the next slide, I can highlight as well. Actually, this, just really quick, this is how you access a lot of the documents on TETHIS. So if you're interested in, for example, offshore wind, collision, and birds, you can filter the knowledge base, basically a large searchable table by the topic areas that you're interested in. So content type, technology, topic area, etc. You can also search all of the content within TETHIS that's got a geographic point. So maybe a study that was done at a wave energy farm in Europe. You can search that by location in the map viewer as well. Next slide. All right, so TETHIS also serves as sort of the main outreach and engagement platform for multiple US and international groups, one of which was OES Environmental, which we've mentioned before, as well as 2 for offshore wind and wind energy in general, which I'll highlight in a second. Next slide, please. So again, I won't repeat what Andrea mentioned on OES Environmental, but we do develop a lot of different resources and tools and kind of variety of information for different audiences. Some of our resources are geared more towards regulators and helping them make decisions with permitting and siting. Some of them are really more geared towards education and younger audiences or general public. So we do have sort of our range of resources, from everything from coloring books to a marine energy collision risk video game, which again is more tidal energy focused, but great for the younger audiences and kids. We have a marine energy video series, a brochure. We have various levels of synthesis to sort of disseminate the information on environmental effects to different audiences. Next slide, please. And again, this is just another kind of screenshot highlight of some of the different resources that we provide. I would recommend the educational resources page as a one-stop shop for a lot of you all and the resources that I think would be most relevant for you, but I'm happy to answer questions, or if you want to email after the fact, we can dive into the different resources available. Next slide, please. Just really quickly to highlight 2 REN or 2 wind energy resources. Another international group that TETHIS supports is REN, working together to resolve environmental effects of wind energy. It's very similar to OES Environmental, but it's focused on land-based and offshore wind. We similarly develop webinars, online tools on TETHIS, fact sheets, etc. So a lot of useful information on there. And then next slide, the final piece today is just the U.S. Offshore Synthesis of Environmental Effects Research Project, or SEER. This is, again, similar to OES Environmental and REN in that we develop resources focused on environmental effects of offshore wind. This one's slightly more tilted to taking the international knowledge and applying it to the U.S. As offshore wind obviously is kind of just getting started here in the U.S., looking at what we can, lessons learned from the international space and applying it to the species and habitats that are kind of local to us. So lots of resources I just spewed out. Next slide, if you want to go to the final. So yeah, again, I know that was a lot of information to digest all at once. We are going to make these slides available, and I know it was recorded, but we really want to just leave you with the message that marine energy and Hawaii seem to be very good partners. There seems to be a lot of great opportunity in the future. So we're very appreciative of your time today, but we're also really interested in how we can support you, how you can support us with marine energy going forward and pushing that rock up the hill, I guess. So thank you so much. Andrea, if you want to jump in too.
Yeah, no, that really sort of sums it up. We're really interested in how your workshops and interactions with the community go, because this is something that obviously is a really key piece. We're focused on OTEC largely in Hawaii, but we still think WAVE and perhaps some others have some real potential. And so we'd love to know how that's going. We'd love to participate any way we can. And yeah, you did get a real fire hose of stuff today, but you'll get the slides and the TETHIS website that Haley mentioned really does host so much of what we do. If you crawl around there, you'll find webinars and expert forums and all kinds of stuff going back quite a while. So thank you for your time, and happy to go on answering questions, but we want to be responsible for your time here today too.
Yes, I would just like to thank you both. That was a lot of really great information, and thank you for including all those resources at the end also. That looks like a real treasure trove of information and resources and links to more that will be very useful for everyone. I am happy to keep this Zoom open if you guys are also willing to stick around. Anyone who needs to, we are right about at 10:30. Anyone who has any other conflicts or obligations, please feel free to drop off. That includes both you and Haley and Andrea also. But if anyone does have any remaining questions and wants to stay on, we can continue the conversation for another 15 minutes or so.
Really interesting questions and information. This Lego League sounds really very cool. We're always really interested in ways to visualize and help get people to understand what we're talking about. We've done a bunch of 3D models of WEX and turbines, which when somebody can sit and spin it, it seems to get them.
Yeah.
in a-
If you haven't yet reached out to First, I recommend you do. I
Okay.
sent you the link to
Great,
First
thank you.
Inspires because they're going to have tens of thousands of kids all across the world working on this stuff for an intense like 6 weeks in August, September, October-ish. Actually through to
Very
December.
cool.
But yeah, and they could probably they usually have a resource page on topics. And so getting your topics and your pages, and even if you have some experts who are interested in working with them to make sure that their stuff is, I think they're probably pretty far along with making sure it's factually accurate and all that, but it's so much fun. You know,
very
and
cool. Is it-
definitely they should have links to your stuff.
It's directed at high school?
You know, they start the middle schoolers are the ones who have to do a project on the topic.
Okay, yeah. That's
High
great.
schoolers, it's only kind of tangential.
Okay.
You know, they build the robots that do stuff and they try to make the points match what's valid, you know, things you should be focusing on or protecting or you know, something like that. But the middle schoolers actually have to do a project. So they are
That's
much
fabulous.
great. They're
That's
really
fabulous.
tortured with it. It's great.
Yeah.
It's
We
really
have-
interesting. Yeah, my son has been involved in that in his middle school the last couple years, and the innovation.
Oh, you poor thing.
The innovation project has been a really fun part of it for the kids, and they come up with some pretty incredible ideas. And their way of thinking, it's not so hampered by life the way that all of our ways of thinking is. So yeah, that's a great connection.
Yeah.
Well, and we struggle in the US. We haven't done a lot with school kids. That's why we have the resource page. But in terms of really hands-on, I was in North Carolina a few weeks ago, and the state puts on one for wind and marine energy. There's not much nationally. I should mention there's a marine energy collegiate competition where undergraduates actually spend a year and design, build, and test a device, and that's been great. But there is sort of a hole for the sort of middle to high school range. So we'll certainly check that out. Thank you very much. That's a great connection.
Yeah, so
great.
probably, you know, I guess usually the kickoff in Hawaii for this, I don't know about other states, every state has these, but we usually have a kickoff in the first week of September where we try to invite experts to come meet with the kids and their coaches so that they have some idea of where to look, you know, for information, because the really engaged teams will actually you know, pick a topic and then try to go to a spot. It's really hard to have a team of 10 you know, middle schoolers all go together anywhere, but they manage to get it to happen, you know. So
yeah. Oh, that's really fabulous. Thank you. Appreciate that. Somebody asked what my background is. I'm a oceanographer, biological oceanographer. So actually getting back to doing OTEC is fun for me because I've been dealing with how do whales run into turbines for a while. And that's not really my background. So but yeah, great. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Any other questions or anything that we can do for you? And don't have to answer now, but think of us as a resource here. And once you've had some time to spend on primer with Tethys and so on, you may find some useful stuff. Tethys has a lot of socioeconomic community engagement sort of resources, papers and reports as well, albeit there isn't as much in this field as we would like there to be. We also should note that every 4 years we write what's called the State of the Science Report. Haley had the cover of our last one, 2020, and the 2024 one's almost done. It will be put out as a draft text in May, and just over a month. We're still writing it. It's about a 300-page report of everything that's known in marine energy, environmental, but there is a major chapter on socioecon, also community stakeholder engagement. Great. That I think will we think is the most comprehensive information there is in the world, because again, we work with these 16 countries, and we cannot take credit for all of it.
Yeah, and those chapters are usually pretty in-depth, but we create sort of one-page fact sheet summaries for each chapter as well. So interested in different topic areas, you can kind of use those as handouts.
Great. Sareen, did you have a question?
Yeah. Is there a data lake type tool with Tethys and Primer where you can download big data and create your own
Absolutely.
analysis?
So if you go to MHKDR, which is the data repository, there is a data lake. We work with the three big, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft Azure. And we have data lakes in each for marine energy. I will tell you, there are not a huge number of data sets in there. The biggest one is the wave energy hindcast. There's 30 years worth of wave data from all over the US, including the Hawaii and the Pacific. And you can certainly go in, they're all free download. And by being in the big data lakes, very, very accessible through any kind of a connection. So yes. So go to Primer, go to MHKDR, read about stuff in Primer, and our hope is, we're just doing a big UX study right now, but our hope is it's pretty easy and accessible to find your way around there. But yes, and the Marine Energy Atlas, you can also download any of the layers that are on. We showed you just a few of them on the Atlas shots, but all those are downloadable as well. Great question.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm clicking around that. I want to make sure I don't accidentally download a 30 terabyte file here.
There is 30 terabytes of data on there. Yep. Yeah, we have NREL are our systems administrators for that, and they know what they're doing. I'm the principal investigator of that project, but I know enough to be dangerous. So,
one other question for me. I don't know if Amy, if you shared about the kind of broader context of this NOAA project we're working on, but would there be opportunities to connect with the other awardees, or maybe something in line with the conference? Maybe Amy, that could be something we talk about more with Andrea and Haley too.
Yes. Yeah, I think that would definitely be great. Yeah, I'm not sure if I told you, Andrea, that as part of the overall project, that a piece that came in is Hawaii will be hosting a workshop for Alaska, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Guam.
yeah.
You know, a long time from now, here, towards the, a little further along as we progress in these projects, but that might be an opportunity as well for you to have, a centralized engagement with all of the 4 projects that are happening across the island.
That's
Sea Grant
fabulous.
programs. Yeah.
We would love to help out, be involved any way we could. Before some of you got on, I was just telling Amy, I just got back from Guam 2 weeks ago and talked with the Sea Grant folks there because they're just sort of trying to decide what they're going to do. I haven't talked to Alaska about this, but I have talked to Puerto Rico as well. It's great. It's absolutely wonderful. And we'd love to have any involvement, any help we can provide.
There might also be an opportunity at Sea Grant Week, which is in Savannah, Georgia, in August of this year. The 3 programs that are running, these projects have pitched a session to do like a community of practice kind of a session that we might also be able to
Sea Grant Week would be a wonderful opportunity for the rest of you. I used to be Sea Grant, so I understand how it works. So yeah, that would be great. We would love to, if you let us know, we'd be happy to send somebody if that was a good opportunity.
Okay, yeah, and I'll let you know if we get picked up for that session.
Yeah. No, that's good for you for doing that, because we have, more and more tried to work with Sea Grant, because we obviously see that around the country as being, it's silly for us to be going in anywhere where you've got, the network and so on. And I think that energy is one that we would really like to see we're working with some folks in the Northeast, but the network is, you know, being able to do that. That's what was so great about Sea Grant Week. Everybody's there. So
yeah, and definitely as we progress here in Hawaii specifically, we would love to host you out as we've talked about. We just have to get things a little further along in the process as we look at those larger community focused workshops as well.
Great, wonderful. Okay, well, just let us know what we can do to help.
Great.
Otherwise, thank you very much for all of your attention today, for getting, as they say, that spew of information you got from us.
Yes, thank you. That was wonderful. And I'll look for the slides in my inbox and we'll get those out to share with everyone as well. And look forward to continuing to work with you and get more of your fantastic knowledge to incorporate here.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for setting this up, Amy. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Andrea and
Mahalo,
Haley.
mahalo.
Mahalo.
Thank
you very much.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.